Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's it going? How's it going? Welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica. And I'm Jessica. How are we doing? How's everybody? Well, we are at the end of this magnificent shit show of a trial. If you have not watched any of the previous videos, why? Is my first question. And if you have, good on ya. Anyway, I would suggest, highly recommend, going back, doing a Cliff Notes version of it. This is the trial of George Burch on trial for first-degree murder of a young woman named Nikki Vander Hayden. There you go. I got it. He claims he did not murder said woman. He claims the boyfriend did it, and the boyfriend made him, forced him to help clean it up and dispose of the body. Boyfriend says, nope, I did not do that. I was at home with the baby, and that was not me. So we went through the opening statements. We went through some testimony. The boyfriend testified. The defendant testified. If nothing else, go watch those two. They're the most interesting parts of it. But you can get a good read on the defendant and his slimy, disgusting ways during cross. Yeah. Tell me what you think in the comments on that one. But yeah. So we're going to get right into it. This one's going to knock it all out. It's going to be closing arguments from both sides because they're relatively short. Closing arguments on both sides, the rebuttal from the prosecution, then we're going to go straight into the verdict, and then, spoiler alert, we'll go right into the sentencing because, well, you know, you only get a sentencing phase if you're found guilty of said crime. So, but again, this trial is quite a few number of years old, so it should not be a surprise of the end result. But I also did a true crime react to the story also, if you want to go back and watch that instead of watching all of these. I did that and then had a few questions, and then found the trial and decided to watch the trial and react to some bits and pieces on that. So that's how we got here. But anyway, let's get into this so we can, get her done. Start out with the prosecution. Now, this lady hasn't said much throughout the trial. I mean, she's done a few here and there. Maybe she's done more and I just haven't seen it because I skipped parts. But anywho, okay.
Close attention. You understand the gravity of the situation, and again, everyone in this courtroom thanks you for responsibilities that you've shown in this case. This case is moving forward now to you. This case is to the point where, as we've indicated, we will argue what we believe the evidence has shown. It was mentioned in the opening statement of the defense that we were the government. I'm not sure what that really means. We are the state of Wisconsin. We represent the state of Wisconsin.
They're
We
the
represent
state of
this community. We
Wisconsin.
represent
They're
you.
the
As we
plaintiff.
present this evidence, we indicate to you what we believe the evidence has shown, but ultimately it's going to be your decision, what you remember, what you think was stated as far as testimony, and how you believe that all
Jury
comes
is the
together.
fact finder.
We have the burden of proof in this case, and we embrace that burden, and we've met that burden in this case. It's been
Oh, we have
mentioned to you the
slideshows.
elements of the crime in this matter. They're pretty simple. The defendant caused the death of Nicole Vanderheiden, and the defendant acted with the intent to kill. As we indicated, as we expected, this case isn't one in where we're all going to be arguing about intent. That's not going to be an issue. That wasn't an issue with respect to the testimony presented. That doesn't seem to be a question that you need to make a determination on. It's very clear by the vicious actions that took place by the actor involved in her death, intent to kill is self-evident. This is clearly a whodunit case. We told you at the start of this case that the evidence would form a path, and that path would lead you to the truth and lead you to finding justice for Nicole. You didn't only follow that path, and we asked you to apply your intelligence, your common sense, and your reason. And when you do so, you'll find the defendants guilty. This is basically a simple case. Who has been proven to have been with Nikki in the last hours of her life?
Look at him
on
back
May
there with his
21st,
big old ears.
2016, in those early morning hours?
Looking
Who has
so
been
evil.
proven unequivocally to have been with her in her last moments?
Ugh.
What does the independent scientific and technical evidence tell us on that point? What does it show? Whose DNA is on her sock? The sock he left behind on her battered body. The crime lab leads us to the defendant with that hit. He's with her in her last moments. What other evidence do we have as to who is with her? The key questions in this case. The Google dashboard. Who's with Nikki at the 4 key areas of Brown County? She's last seen by Aaron Kalinsky at the sardine can. We know the defendant's really close by before that at Richard Cranium's, a very short walk. Then where does he end up? Defendant's phone continues to track him, continues to place him, it continues to implicate him. It puts him on a murder scene on Berkeley. Then, third spot, it places the defendant at the spot, the field on Hoffman, where he dumps her body. Following that, his phone tracks him to where he disposes of her clothing and her personal belongings. Keep in mind, he destroyed her face. You couldn't even identify her. And then he takes all her property with her IDs and so forth and makes sure that's not even near her body. Gets it out of the area to further slow down identification and investigation into this homicide. With this location evidence, with him at the area of the sardine can, Berkeley Street, the field on Hoffman, and 172 where her clothing and personal property is, and the DNA hit, ladies and gentlemen, we could have rested at that point. That's all the evidence you needed to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But we had more, and you got to hear about it. The evidence went far beyond the phone and its location and the hit on the sock. We have the presence of the defendant's DNA where it should not be. You heard about the numerous swabs that were done on her poor person. Dr. Regalska, Sergeant Lopnow took good evidence, and then you found out where were the significant points. Where did the defendant show up? He showed up all over this woman. Cervical swabs, vaginal swabs, and then all the other markers that you see. Places that he handled her, places that he dragged her, places that he assaulted her. And all while he's finished with the disposal, what's he do following that? The forensic search shows him obsessively searching for news accounts with respect to what's going on in this investigation. What are they finding out about me? Am I going to get away with it? Checking it routinely, regularly, and not looking for anything else. How many accounts did you hear of on that forensic search of his phone? He's worried about being discovered. You learned about that, and that's further proof of his involvement in committing this crime. And all this evidence is undisputed. In the opening, defense told you it was his phone. He was at those locations. It is his DNA. This isn't even something we need to argue about because it's uncontradicted. The defense told you, they agreed with the state's evidence, most of the state's evidence. They told you it would come down to argument. Well, we say it comes down to logic and common sense, not argument. They cannot erase our evidence. Now the defendant has to try to come up with an explanation for all this evidence. Find a way to explain it to you. He needs an explanation for all the physical and scientific evidence that shows that he's a killer. Their explanation is ridiculous. It's insulting to your intelligence.
It really,
They offer distractions, but worse, they offer testimony to the defendant. Such arrogance. He meets Nikki at Richard Cranium's. He's a stranger. He doesn't know her. What's he tell you? She's flirting with him. What's he say? You can tell when someone's into you. Clearly, this 6'7" hunk of man could not be resisted. Saw his picture. What was a girl to do?
Ooh,
What were Nikki's choices?
that made him
He told you
mad.
she didn't seem to be with anyone. She was by herself. He saw her as prey, somebody to move in on. He had one thing in mind, and it was not giving her a ride home. Think about it.
Look at him.
They
Look at
both
his
wanted
face.
consensual sex. They would have gone to his house, to his home, where he had a room, 2.5 blocks, he says, from Richard Cranium's, where he had privacy, where he was allowed to bring home women and did it on other occasions. Oh, but no. There was an elderly gentleman in the house at the time in the living room. That makes no sense.
That made it awkward.
But no, they don't have sex there. They don't go to a hotel. No. It's on to Berkeley. And she obviously had to tell him how to get there. He didn't know where it was. She obviously gave him directions because she thought he was taking her home to her child, to the father of her child, to her home. And that's also, when you get to Berkeley, how we know the defendant's lying when he testified. Because what did he tell you that Nikki said? He claimed Nicole told him there was a light on and the babysitter was there. Nicole would never have made that statement. There was no car in the driveway or in the street. Dallas's vehicle was not there. Nikki would have not said, oh, the babysitter's still there. Dallas testified she'd gone already. She left around 3 a.m., right before they got there. There was no vehicle to be seen. She's friends with Dallas. She knew her car. She would never have said, oh, the babysitter's here. There's a light on.
You
She
know,
would
I
have
didn't
seen
catch
the car was
that.
gone.
I'm not good with
She
timelines.
probably assumed that Doug was home. He makes this statement up. He makes up this account. This whole thing is made up. And that statement there points out that Nikki didn't say that because none of this happened. He tries to make you believe this encounter was consensual as far as sexual activity. Killing her is not enough. He seeks to defame her. Her life's gone, so let's go after her reputation. She's not here to counter these outrageous claims. That's very convenient for him. Infidelity. What, revenge sex? He calls it wasn't gentle intercourse. So now we're supposed to believe this stay-home mom, this part-time substitute teacher, is into rough sex with a stranger. He has no shame. What really happened? Evaluate the proof. What happened, do we know, to this poor woman's person and her private areas? Contusions, abrasions, vaginal vault blood presence. And think about this. The doctor told you this wasn't just from stomping, this was internal injuries as well. Penetration took place. Consider the vaginal area. This woman was in a relationship with a man. She'd borne 3 children. The vaginal area is an area designed for penetration. People around the world have sexual intercourse, and we don't have abrasions and contusions and bleeding. This was forcible. This was painful. The doctor told you that. But the defendant can't admit that because it's his motive for the murder. You don't need a medical degree to draw the same conclusion Dr. Ogalska did, that this was suggestive of a sexual assault. The evidence and the injuries suggestive of a sexual assault. This was a forcible penetration. It would have been a painful penetration. It was a rape.
Just the things that she
Aside
went
from all these
through.
horrible injuries, which are horrible. With respect to just that area of her person, practically speaking, ladies and gentlemen, I know you use your common sense. Why do we know that she did not choose to have sex with this defendant? It's because of the location. It's like real estate. It's all about the location. You're not going to have sex in front of your neighbor's house and near your own home, where your father, your child, may be right around the corner. Great place for a romantic tryst. The back of the Blazer, where he says he barely fits. Well, wait, let's make it even better. Let's open the doors so the show gets even better for the neighborhood. It's an absurd account for something that's supposed to have been consensual, because it wasn't.
It's very true.
The outlandish account continues when he talks about Hoffman. His escape from Hoffman. When the man has him at gunpoint, some 5 feet away, but he's able to lunge. Pushed as hard as I could, and haul ass, as he says it, to his truck, which was 10 to 15 feet away. Bullets don't fly. They can't cross the distance faster than him running. Gets in there, no shots fired at the car, and he puts it in low gear, and still, Doug Dietrich lets him go, the witness to the murder. Ridiculous. The defendant then chooses to dispose of all the evidence on 172 that can actually tell us what happened, that can give us clues, that needs to be in the hands of authorities. And then after this frightening near-death experience, drives home, goes to bed,
Takes a shower.
doesn't
goes to
call
bed.
anyone, sends no
Goes
aid to Nikki,
fishing the
who he
next
doesn't even
day.
know is dead and is laying in a field. Doesn't call 911, goes to sleep, sleeps in, he's awakened by Ed the next day, goes fishing. Because, well, after all, it was a pre-planned event. He doesn't tell Ed in the morning, on the trip down, maybe on the boat there were other people around. They're spending the time together in the evening. He's driving back with him, and he doesn't tell Ed Jackson squat. The man who reminded him of his dad, who was his best friend, the father figure, Ed Jackson. The one person I could talk to, he says on direct. Isn't that ironic? Well, apparently he wasn't. And all the while, he's checking on the news stories, even before there's an arrest of Doug Dietrich. Checking out, wow, do they know yet? I'm going to get away with this. Even later on his phone, even when the police are begging someone to come forward, if you know anything about these circumstances, asking for help from our community, he says nothing. But he's got an explanation for that, ladies and gentlemen, because from where he comes from, you don't talk. You don't tell on people. I feared for my own safety I could end up dead. Well, let's think about that. You're the only one who knows who the true killer is. You could identify that true killer and take him off the streets. But no, you run the risk you'll just bump into him again in Green Bay, where you continue to visit for months and you don't reveal what you know. You could make yourself safe by making sure the police have the right man and you give them the evidence they need to convict. For months and months, he wasn't afraid because that wasn't what happened. He didn't do anything to ensure the killer was brought in because he was the killer. What do you say? I didn't know who I could talk to. What do you say? How about an anonymous phone call? Have someone else called in. There were many ways. Send a letter. I mean, we now know there's a lot of things you can check on phones. How about an anonymous letter to the authorities? But no, he didn't do any of that. But he says, well, now I should have told. He should have told the truth that he did it. He hadn't had this all made up yet. It's an outlandish story, and it's all made up. He brought up references to a movie when he testified. If someone submitted this script, it would be rejected. This is wholly implausible. The court told you have to make determinations on credibility, and that is a huge responsibility, and it's an important focus in this case, as in many trials. The state knows you'll consider all of those factors. You'll make and weigh them as you should and apply them to every single witness. But with respect to Doug Dietrich's testimony and the defendants, you cannot reconcile it. You can't say, well, one person might be mistaken and maybe someone else misunderstood something. They're diametrically opposed. You're going to have to sit down and say which person's telling the truth. And when you do so, you'll look to all these matters. And what will you be looking at? And the state thinks one of the key factors will be, again, the reasonableness of the witness's testimony, the reasonableness of their account as to what took place. But you can also consider demeanor. Doug Dietrich took all the cross-examination questions. He answered them. He was up there a long time. Maybe didn't remember everything. Or the defendant do on cross. Got angry. I've already answered that. I'm not going to answer anymore. I think he revealed his true colors. But you saw it all, and you'll apply those factors, and the state's comfortable with that. As you consider as you consider the credibility, what do you know about these individuals? This is a man who left his children behind, 11 and 14, to escape supervision by his probation agent. And he told us on direct that I sat down with them and indicated my situation, and they were 100% behind me. But he didn't tell them. On cross, he admits, well, no, I didn't tell him that. So he wasn't even truthful with his own children. He absconded from probation. He left behind his wife, whom he wasn't divorced with yet, his mother, who he's not involved with, and his kids. He gets up here and starts seeing young Jordan Schuyler. She thinks they're serious. She thinks it's a close relationship. Apparently she's got that wrong. You heard from his friends. He's out talking up other women. From his own testimony, he went after Nikki. To determine credibility, the court has told you you can consider the fact that the defendant has been convicted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but he has 5 criminal convictions. And that's important for you to factor in as you decide Whom are you believing in this matter? The sad fact is Ed and Linda Jackson trusted this man. They gave him a home. They gave him a vehicle. They gave him a phone. And he spent months with them. And then they sent him packing. His gripe is that, oh, Ed changed. No, Ed and Linda saw the real defendant. Young Jordan Schuyler trusted the defendant. And worst of all is Nikki trusted the defendant. She trusted him to give her a ride home, to get her safely back to her family. Cannot make the same mistake. This man is not deserving of your trust. Clearly, there's one person through these many days whose voice you have not heard. You haven't heard from Nicole Vanderheiden. George Burch sought to silence Nicole Vanderheiden, but she does speak to you. In her struggles, she tells you the truth. In her fight for life, she can be heard. With her blood on the grass, with her blood on the curb, on the street, with her hair strewn about, with her blood on these cords. As the doctor indicated that she either struggled against to make a thicker, wider mark, or he pulled and he moved it in his attempt to silence her. These cords, with her presence, speak to you. And what else is on the cord? The defendant's DNA. On the murder weapon. When he wasn't bashing her head in. That's Exhibit 23. Speaks to you. And again, as I've indicated, all of those spots that were swabbed on her person, they tell a story to you as to what the truth is in this matter. And keep in mind that Dietrich is excluded from those locations. Beyond her person, we have Nicole's clothing. Today, you saw her filthy pants. You saw her bloody underwear, blood on both objects, and you heard about the bloody top, the tank, and bloody overshirt. Nikki's clothes prove beyond all doubt that the defendant's account is total fiction, because they show you her clothes were on her when she was killed. All of that blood was from the stomping and the injuries that were on her when she was killed. They're not off, as the defendant would have you believe, as they're having sex in the car, and then she's killed. The clothing tells a different story. The blood stains destroy the defendant's story. She wasn't killed after having sex and after her clothes were already off. And again, the DNA of the defendant in so many locations. From the vaginal swabs, the cervical swabs, the left forearm, the right forearm, the left wrist, the right wrist, the left ankle, the right ankle, the left neck, left posterior neck, the right arm, the left arm, mons pubis, left palm, chest, right hand fingernail clippings, again the cord, her right foot sock, her left foot sock, in the area of her shirt. He manhandled her and he left his mark. And she gives you that through her voice, through her person, through her clothing. Nikki was viciously and brutally murdered. No one's going to dispute that. 241 injuries, significant facial injuries, fractured jaw, and the injuries of the genitalia, what we referred to. And again, strangled and blunt force trauma to the head. It was such a horrific death, it's hard to fit all the injuries on the diagram. Nikki did not give up easily. She showed her spirit through the end. Nikki did not go gently into the night. Through her will to live, she left you signs. And that turned into evidence to bring her justice. Don't ignore her efforts. To tell you the truth about her murder, she fought to live, but her fight also gives you answers. Don't let her struggles have been in vain. Allow Nicole to guide you on the path to find the truth, which will lead you to the clear conclusion that George Burch is guilty of this murder beyond all reasonable doubt. We ask you to return a verdict of guilty for first-degree intentional homicide. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Told you that this case is about the tragic death of Nicole Vanderheiden. And just like in their opening statement, the state completely ignored that they chose to arrest Doug Dietrich for that crime. They didn't tell you about it in their opening statement when they told you they were going to give you the roadmap of what happened. They ignored it. Now, this case involves so much emotion. We've seen it all. We've felt it together. Every person in this courtroom has. There's sadness, tragedy, nervousness, stress, anger. It's the full array. That's what you would expect in a case like this.
Your voice is
But
annoying.
it's also important
and I don't
to
like your
focus on the
face.
facts of this case.
All right,
The
Bambi.
facts show you that Doug Dietrich committed this crime.
Where?
Justice for Nicole is not going to be delivered by a wrongful conviction of George Burch. Doug Dietrich had the motive, the opportunity, and the connection to this crime. Now, when the state talked to you about the motive that George Burch would have, that's completely fabricated. It's brought out of thin air. You didn't hear any evidence to provide a reason why George would commit it, so they had to make it up. You heard strong reasons why Doug Dietrich would commit this crime. Nikki had a voice
Why?
on May 20th and May 21st. And remember those text messages. Remember what she was telling Doug Dietrich as their fight was just beginning. That was strong evidence when the state arrested Doug Dietrich. The state says you can't believe Mr. Burch's testimony. You can't believe his story. They called it outlandish. They said it challenged your education and your intelligence. They called it ridiculous. Those are their words. The prosecutor came up here and told you that. That's not the first time that a prosecutor has said that. We've heard those words before. At Oshkosh, there's a professor. That professor is also a criminal defense attorney. And he taught a Tuesday night class. It was a 3-hour class. And towards the end of the semester, he always had a question and answer session. And there's always the same question. Professor, how do you do your job? How are you a criminal defense attorney? He never responded with a long explanation or diving into philosophy or theory. No, he had a story. His story was about a client that he represented. That client had recently become a father. He didn't have custody of his daughter, but he was starting to gain visitation rights with her. He loved his daughter. Now, right around when his daughter was 1 year old, he was able to take her for the weekend on a Saturday. And he took her to the stores. He took her out and about. It wasn't planned, but he was excited because he got to be with his daughter. It was a normal day. He brought his daughter home. Later that day, the mother, the grandparents went to change this little girl's diaper. This little girl had blood in her diaper. How do you explain that? You call the police. The police arrest somebody. That's how. That's where the professor comes in. He's a criminal defense attorney. He eventually gets all the evidence in the case, all the discovery. It doesn't come in right away, but as it's coming in, he's reviewing it. He's got to represent this guy now. He has to go talk to him. And he does that. He goes to talk to his client to see what they're going to do, what's going to happen. And his client is beside himself. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. But I also can't explain how. The only thing he could even think of when he racked his entire mind was that when he was at the DMV, he had put his daughter on a low shelf, and she had fallen and hit perfectly on a metal wastebasket. That's the story that the criminal defense attorney had to now investigate, because that's his job and that's his duty. So he went and he did it, and he investigated. He had to go to the DMV and request their surveillance video. He almost felt ashamed even having to request it. He got the video, he was watching it, and he's watching it, and there's his client with the daughter. And she falls just exactly how that person said, just how the client said she fell. It validated his client's story, but that's still not proof. That still doesn't explain that. So he had to go to a doctor. And he went to the doctor.
Okay,
And the
so
doctor explained
given
those
an
injuries are
argument.
consistent. That actually helps us explain what happened to this girl. Seems ridiculous.
that's not the story.
But if there wasn't that surveillance video, that man would have gone to prison. He would have been wrongfully convicted. The state would call that ridiculous. They would have said the same things today, just because they can't believe that story. Just because a story sounds ridiculous or sounds unbelievable doesn't mean it is. I ask that you focus on all the evidence in this case, that you don't continuously ignore that the state arrested Doug Dietrich and there's a full-scale investigation into Doug Dietrich. We've seen the evidence. We've seen him testify. He had the motive, the opportunity, and the connection to this crime. The first piece of evidence I ask that you focus on is when Doug Dietrich actually called the police. He didn't call the police until after Nikki's body was found. You heard the testimony. Nikki's body was found sometime at right around 2 o'clock. There was a huge police buildup,
But there's no
blockades,
evidence that
cars.
says
You heard that
that
young
he
farmer
knew
boy tell you when he left the
that
field,
her
he
body
went
had
car
been
to car.
found.
That's how many police officers were there. Doug Dietrich chose not to call the police until 4:37. He could have explained why. He didn't
He
have a
did
good
explain
explanation for that. You saw him on the stand.
He was
Nikki
hungover.
was gone.
He was taking
He
care of
knew
a
why.
baby.
He didn't want the police to come. He was trying to cover up what he did. You heard
Y'all,
testimony about Nikki's Buick Rendezvous.
Doug's story
You heard a lot of
is
testimony.
way more
testimony about it.
believable than George's story.
Remember this
Nikki's
testimony
run off in the
of Donald
past.
Chick.
Maybe
Donald
she's
Chick is a
never
28-year-old or 28 years on the force of the
been
Green Bay Police
gone for
Department,
long,
a
and she's
retired,
always come home.
experienced officer,
But people do things.
trained to observe and report,
Maybe this
to
time
accurately take note of the situation in
she
front of him.
just
He knew
stayed
the details.
out.
He knew Doug Dietrich.
She
He knew
found
2329 Berkeley
she
Road.
went
And when
to
he drove
someone's
by
house
on the morning
and
of
she
May
passed
21st,
out and she slept and
there's
she'll
no
be
vehicle in the
home.
garage. He remembered that specifically. 2 days later, he knew he had to call police. He knew he had to report it.
Like
He also
I said
heard that there were
before,
spare keys in the
they
house.
were
And you heard
relatively
testimony
new in
that
this
those were a valet
relationship.
key. Sergeant
And
Slinger said that
again,
those
Doug
keys wouldn't
doesn't
start the
seem like-
vehicle. But that defeats the entire
Yeah.
purpose of what a valet key is. We know that vehicle moved. Don Chick told you that vehicle moved. It was not there. What about the snapshot data? Well, technology can fail us. Think about a GPS, like we've talked about in this case before, when we talked about it when we picked the jury. What do you do when you have a GPS unit telling you to drive into a lake? You are there as the eyewitness, and this technology is telling you to go straight into the lake. GPS units, trillions probably of miles covered. They'll tell you it's accurate 97% of the time, or whatever that number is. Do you drive into the lake? No, because you're an eyewitness there. Eyewitness testimony can be more important than technology itself. You can't ignore Don Chick's testimony. He told you he even had a nickname on the force for being so observant. The state wants you to completely ignore this officer's testimony. You can't pick and choose which officer's testimony you bring out. Now, Don Chick was not the only person that saw something suspicious on May 21st at 2329 Berkeley Road. Remember Lisa Skoletsky? She has 3 young boys, all of them are in college now, but they were teens in high school at that time. She took that stand. She didn't know Doug. She took the stand and told you there is somebody standing in the driveway sometime before noon talking on the phone. That male, medium build, on his phone before noon. She didn't know who Doug was. She doesn't have an interest in any of this.
What does that have to do with anything?
But she eventually found out who Doug was because she saw him on the news and she put it together. That was Doug Dietrich. How does the state explain that? Doug Dietrich didn't explain that. He said he was sleeping. The phone tech can't explain that because they said his phone wasn't working. Did he have a second phone? Is that phone air? I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't have to. It's not
His
Mr.
phone
Burch's
wasn't
burden in this
working.
case. It's the state's. 2 eyewitnesses that discredit what Doug Dietrich was doing. Now let's talk about the third report. Somebody called in a suspicious person walking by
She
that
also
creek
could have
by
saw
2329 Berkeley Road.
it at the next house,
So
the
what do
house
they do? What do
before.
officers do? They sent the
She
dive
saw
team
it
to search
in
that little brown
passing.
creek that you saw on the map. They didn't search the giant 3 ponds behind the house. They had a dive team. They didn't do that. A third suspicious report of activity in that area. That person was Doug Dietrich. He had been seen by Lisa Skoletsky. And then the other part that I asked that you focus on from Donald Chick's testimony is what else he saw. He didn't just see an empty garage. He saw a
We
blue
saw it in the
SUV
rear view
parked with a door
mirror.
open with a woman, medium build, blonde. Who was that? Why was Nikki's vehicle gone? Where was it? Those are questions that aren't answered.
He saw that in his rear view mirrors. The defense had no.
The second
Nobody.
big case, or big piece in this case, is motive.
I was gonna do their
The state doesn't
testimonies,
have to
but
prove motive
nope.
as much as they try. Their
don't
motive
have
with
to
Mr.
prove
Burch is
motive.
fabricated. It's made up. There's not evidence of that. Those are conclusions that they're making. They're allowed to argue here. Still not in the evidence.
Okay, well, they don't need it,
So
so
George Burch
move the fuck
had
on.
no motive to commit this crime.
But he did.
George Burch took the stand. He came in here and we got his background information because it's important. Because you need to know who he is as a person.
No, you got the background information.
He doesn't
because
tell
you
his
knew
kids that he's on
testimony
probation, but he
fucking
doesn't have
sucked.
to be a good father. You heard how he communicates with them. He even learned to play video games so that they could communicate online and he
But
could stay in
he's the
touch
one
with
that
them.
said he tells
That's
his
a loving
kids
father. That's a
everything and he
caring
doesn't
father.
have sugarcoat shit.
You saw
He's the
the
one that put
emotional
that out
reaction,
there.
and for the state to scoff when he was talking about his father just shows the strength of their actual arguments.
Oh, please.
He loved his father. His father was a role model. He was a loving father and a loving son. We also heard about his work ethic. George Burch was a hard worker. Anywhere he ended up in life, he would find a job right away, whether it was Virginia, New York, or Wisconsin.
I mean, he was a
You
job
even heard the
hopper.
way George talked about his ex-wife. Their marriage might not have ended happily, but he still loved her. And you heard that. You saw that when he testified. He took that stand and he showed real emotion.
Real emotion.
Now, who had motive to kill Nicole? Where does motive actually exist in this case that we've seen in the evidence?
Well, motive doesn't matter.
Doug
so
Dietrich had the motive to kill Nicole.
why?
Let's talk about their general relationship. He got on the stand and told you that wedding bells were in the future. He talked about how Dylan Vanderheiden was going to walk his mom down the aisle. Notice he didn't tell you that just 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks prior, he was texting and communicating with his mother that in fact they were going to break up. That Nicole was going to go on her way with
He
the
was
kids too.
mad.
It was not a happy relationship.
Most
Greg was a
aren't.
close personal friend to both, Greg Matthew. And he testified he saw them fight. Now, they fought like a normal couple would. But even Greg, somebody that is close to them, didn't know that Doug wasn't working because the relationship was on the rocks.
He wasn't working.
Greg didn't
Because
know
they
that the
had a
relationship was in a
baby.
funk. And he's a close personal friend. You heard that their relationship was indeed in a funk and that Doug wasn't working. That was not a good relationship. You can see that boiling underneath. And then that brings us to May 20th and May 21st. Nikki wanted to go out. She wanted to have a good time. You heard her in Dallas talking. She was excited for a date night. She got to go out. She didn't get to go out often. And she got to go out with Doug. Doug had other priorities. Doug's priorities were his other friends, drinking, drugs, and Nikki when she was around.
Aww.
Now, when they went to the watering hole, things started okay. Things started great, it sounded like. They were having a decent time. But it wasn't long until they separated. It wasn't long until the argument started. You heard how that escalated from Nikki's point of view. We heard some of Nikki's last words through text messages to Doug. She called him abusive. She said hurts her. And they were about infidelity. Those three things. Now, Doug Dietrich was on that stand. He could have explained any of that to you. He could have taken
those
ownership
things
for any of that.
From a real,
He didn't know why. That's what he said to you.
maybe
And you're supposed to believe that.
intoxicated,
He just didn't know why she would say those things.
hurt-feelered woman.
We all know why she would say those things. Maybe alcohol finally gave her the courage to come out and say them straight to Doug.
I mean, she didn't say them
And Doug
straight
finally
to
got
Doug.
home, still didn't really care where Nikki was. And he caught them. He caught Nikki with George Burch. So you have a relationship that's on the rocks. You have this boiling fight. And then you have George with Nikki. Those are each by themselves sufficient to prove motive.
But motive doesn't
Altogether,
matter.
that creates the ultimate crime of passion. The ultimate motive. Remember, George had no motive to commit this crime. None. That's a huge hole in the state's case. You also need to focus on the next day. It's now May 22nd. People had started to find out that Nikki had passed. People were sad. She clearly had a lot of people that cared about her. We've seen that in this process. One of those people was Dallas Kennedy. Dallas was trying to stay in touch with Doug to see what's happening. And when she called Doug, she was upset in general. Her friend had passed. And she finally said to Doug, Doug, what happened? That is a direct question. Doug, what happened? And Doug said, I don't know. She hit her head and walked home. She hit her head. Not a single law enforcement officer had told Doug the injuries to Nicole. Not one. You heard Investigator Shield get on the stand and tell you there are certain indicators of guilt. When he goes on a homicide investigation,
again,
someone is referring to the
if
victim
you
in the past
listen
tense.
to his
That's a sign of guilt.
testimony,
You know what another sign of guilt is?
he doesn't
When you bring up a fact that you shouldn't know.
sound
When you bring up a fact that you
all
wouldn't
the
know unless you were
way
there,
comprehensible.
unless you killed that person. How would Doug know that Nicole was hit in the head?
He said she
That's
hit
a
her
confession.
head. No, it's not. That's a stretch, baby.
I also want you to follow Dr. Rogalska's testimony.
I love these paper boards. Paper.
Dr.
Poster
Rogalska
boards.
testified that
Shit.
there is a repetitive pattern on Nicole. That repetitive pattern was in a D or a U shape. She said that that repetitive pattern means that it could have been caused by a non-natural object. That's the technical term for telling you there is a missing murder weapon in this case.
Maybe a golf club.
A missing murder weapon in the D or U shape. Remember that 1 or 2 inch hole in Mr. Dietrich's residence. Think about what the bottom of a gun looks like, a bottom of a handgun, and what shape that is.
He doesn't have a handgun, y'all.
We can't tell you whether or not any of those things were used because Dr. Rogalska didn't have a way to compare it to those injuries. There is a missing murder weapon in this case, and we can't tell you where it is. Mr. Burch cannot tell you where it is. But again,
He
he
just shot her instead
the
of beating
state
her
bears
ass.
the burden in this case. It is their job. They knew it
Doesn't
need to
make
explain
any
why
sense.
there is a missing murder weapon in this case, and they have not done so. They didn't even bring it up. What they did bring up, remember all those photos of the blue and white shoes with the M pattern. They also highlighted the herringbone pattern on Nicole's back. They wanted that in your minds. They showed that photo over and over. Think
But
about
it
that
also
M or
doesn't
V
really
pattern
matter what the
on those
murder
blue and white
weapon
Nike
is
shops.
the fact that she was beat to death.
I don't know if the state was caught off guard or if they were doing it
Because
intentionally, but we heard weren't even George Burch's
necessarily
shoes.
one blow
Those M or V patterns. Those were Matt Wassenberg's shoes.
that killed her, I don't think.
They're not trying to say
It
Matt
was
Wassenberg was a part of this.
blunt
In fact,
force trauma and blood
George Burch
loss.
didn't even live with Matt Wassenberg at that time. So it's not even like they could have even slipped those on.
It's not even necessarily a weapon
They didn't even have that. Like,
needed.
do you remember who had that M and V pattern in this case on their shoes? Now, George says he doesn't know what hit him in the back of the head, but he eventually saw Mr. Dietrich with a handgun. We also know that Mr. Dietrich had a concealed carry permit. A concealed carry permit is so that you can have a handgun and conceal it. You don't do that with a shotgun. You don't do it with a rifle. Police didn't find a billy club or a taser at his house. You have a handgun. No handgun was
Just
ever
because
recovered.
you have your
This
conceal and
missing
carry
murder
doesn't
weapon
mean you
was never
necessarily
recovered.
have a gun.
Are they in the ponds behind the
Does he
Dietrich
have
house on
anything
2329
registered to
Berkeley
him?
Road? Are they in the East River or along the East River Trail? Again, George Burch can't tell you. We can't tell you. It's not our job to tell you. It's the state's.
And
One
they
of the
told
things that
you
could
he
have helped
doesn't
the
have a
state
fucking
find that murder
handgun.
weapon is if George would have come forward right away. He should have come forward right away. He knows that. He told you it was wrong.
But then he would have
He took ownership for that right there
he would
on
have
the
told
stand.
on himself.
And just because he didn't come forward doesn't mean he was able to on that. He had gone to the police right away. He wouldn't be sitting in that chair. Also, remember these pictures. These are just a subset of all the photos we saw of the Dietrich residence in Nicole's house. It was a messy area. It should be. They had a kid. We get that. We're not trying to say it was a dirty house and they're bad people. That's not what we're trying to say. But what Sergeant Detective Yankee told you was that was inconsistent with the house reeking like a cleaning agent on May 23rd. Who was cleaning in that house? What were they cleaning in that house? Because it sure wasn't anything that Detective Sergeant Yankee could tell you. And remember who she is. A very experienced professional. Somebody who has risen up the ranks of the Brown County Sheriff's Detective Unit.
Well, his
She
mom had
uncovered
been there.
that smell and noticed that it didn't appear to fit that scene. And it wasn't a room. It wasn't an area. It was the entire first floor. It was the entire second floor. That's a strong smell. Was a weapon being cleaned? Was the sweatshirt that Doug Dietrich was wearing on that night being cleaned? Remember, George said Doug was wearing a sweatshirt. He saw that. No sweatshirt went to the lab to be tested. We know Doug Dietrich had sweatshirts. We also know Doug Dietrich followed his normal routine that night and took his clothes off. Remember that. How specific he was able to get.
But
when he told you
he
about following
wore
his
the
morning routine at
undershirt.
10 a.m.
If
on
he
May
would have
21st,
listened,
he was able to be so specific at such a critical moment, even though he seemed to not remember anything else. Why would that be?
What do you mean he
But if
didn't
he followed that
remember?
routine, which he said he did, his clothes were off. If his clothes
Because
were
that's
off,
what
it
he
doesn't
does
matter
every night.
what shirts they sent to the lab to be tested, because he would have had to put something else on. Is that what he was cleaning? Is that what the smell of that cleaning agent was?
So his mom was there the day of. So she had been, you can see in the interrogation video or the interview, she's over there doing dishes. So you know his mom is over there cleaning the house. Get out of here, bro. Now listen. And then what else did he say? What else is his big gripe? He can't remember things. Again, Doug does not seem to really comprehend a lot of things. Doug seems to not be able to time manage very well. He does not seem you know, he seems like a squirrel kind of guy. To me, like he gets off track and you kind of have to focus him. You know, he's got some things and it doesn't match the scene. First of all, you can put some air fresheners in your house and it can smell super duper clean and it look like a pigsty. Trust me. So your little argument here, Bambi, doesn't quite work.
Also,
But
remember
good try.
all the cables and cords we've seen in these photos. There's boxes of them. There's areas of them. And remember the cords from the garage, the cables from the garage. 2 bundles of them. Similar length, similar style. They had that outer sheath.
Every adult has
They
a
had the
box
frayed metal at the end.
cables
Some of
and
them were even
cords.
silver. That's not just a coincidence that those same type of cables were used in this crime. It's not a coincidence. We know where Doug Dietrich got those cables from. He had other cables just like them in his garage. These are the images you saw today, taken from Doug Dietrich's home. The images that show Doug Dietrich knew of that area. But you don't have to rely on those photos. You can rely on Doug Dietrich's testimony. His testimony said he knew Berkeley Road. He knew Hoffman Road. He went to Ziggy's, which was right by where the body was found. That was a family restaurant.
That he
This just
built
helps confirm
up.
it. He knew that area. He knew it well.
His dad's.
The state wants to argue
They
that he would have hid the
developed
body
that
somewhere else.
neighborhood.
They're trying to guess what Doug Dietrich was doing in an
God.
absolute panic. He had just killed the mother of his child. And he's supposed to act in that rational basis. He went to somewhere he was familiar with, somewhere he knew, somewhere that had trees, tall grass, and was off the road. What Mr. Dietrich didn't calculate was that field was being farmed now. Your Dick Vandehei get up on the stand and tell you that that was a new area to be farmed. That was a new area. They had to pull the rocks. They had to prepare it to farm.
Oh my God.
Doug didn't count on that. He didn't know about that. But just as important,
did.
you have to remember that George
George
had
didn't,
no
'cause
idea
he's
about this
not
area.
familiar
The
with
state
the
has said it
area.
multiple times. Even their opening, they told you he had no idea where he was going. None. He's from Virginia, lived in New York. He had never been
Exactly.
in here.
He didn't know
in this
anything
area.
about the field. That's why he put her there.
You have to paint the picture. The entrance into that field from Hoffman Road. It's pitch black. There's no signs. No way of knowing that that entrance is there. But what's just as important is we want you to rely on that Gmail data. We want you to use the Google location data. Remember how long that trip took from Berkeley Road to that farm field. Under 6 minutes. That was a direct route from Berkeley Road to that field. And remember the driving distance that Google said it would take. 6 minutes. Doug Dietrich got George Burch and Nicole Vanderheiden there even quicker than Google suggested the drive would be. That is a direct path. George Burch would have no idea that that field was there. Pitch black. Doug Dietrich knew that field was there. He knew that area. He knew it well. You can't explain that away. And I also ask that you question their Fitbit data and their Fitbit evidence. The first thing I want to show you is a photo from the crime lab. Remember, they were there on May 24th. This is Doug Dietrich's office. What do you see in the bottom left, that photo? You see 2 more Fitbits. That right there is the black Fitbit, a black Fitbit. Remember, Doug's in jail. They allegedly have custody of his Fitbit. Which Fitbit are we talking about? Does that change the data? Does that help explain why Doug's DNA is not on the Fitbit? How does a Fitbit work? What's the error rate? Can you edit the data? I would love to know any of those things. The state didn't provide anybody who can help understand these questions. There's nobody that can help explain why multiple Fitbits could make a difference or would make a difference. Is that harmless error by the state? I don't know. I stand back and I think about all the experts you actually saw. DNA, medical examiners, footwear specialists, cable comparisons. Both cars were gone through by crime scene analysts. You had professional videographers. You had progressive snapshot. We have every piece of damn technology in the world with an expert here, except for the Fitbit. Where is the Fitbit expert that can explain any of this and any of this data? Not here, not in this case. Why did they not provide that expert? Why did they not want somebody to explain that data? Why did they not want someone to explain what would happen if there's multiple Fitbit units?
Because they don't need
multiple
it.
profiles, different phones. We don't know.
Because they don't need
The
that
state chose
data.
not to bring someone.
They got enough.
A major
Any other
piece
shit?
of this, of all the evidence in this case, in the state's case, and our defense is DNA. We didn't challenge any of the DNA findings by Mr. Scott. He seemed respected his testimony, came through clearly.
Yeah.
And we told you right from the opening, we weren't going to challenge it
Yeah, because you're
because it helps
idiot.
verify Mr. Burch's story. Just like the Google data. George Burch explained that he was having consensual sex with Miss Vanderheiden,
No.
that he had to carry her body to that field.
I don't
That
believe you.
explains why his DNA was on Nicole.
Nope.
Now, why was George Burch's DNA on that cable? George took the stand. He didn't try to guess at it or try to explain it to you because he couldn't, because he was knocked out. He stayed consistent with that. You would think if he was trying to make up this elaborate story, he would have come up with some sort of explanation to everything. He didn't even try because he didn't need to. He didn't know. He testified truthfully. You also heard Kevin Scott testify about secondary touch DNA. That means where your DNA can be on something without ever even touching it. Like if you touch somebody, you can take their DNA and transfer it. George told you that Doug had touched him. He told you that there was a physical altercation.
When?
Also remember the amount of George Burch's DNA on that cord or cable. 0.001 nanograms per microliter, the lowest possible level
Don't matter.
that the DNA expert could even test for. George can't explain that, and he hasn't tried. Did Doug Dietrich touch him with the cable? Was it secondary touch? George doesn't know. but there are clearly explanations for it at such a low level. Now, how does the state
What?
explain why Doug Dietrich's DNA was on Nicole's bloody underwear, bloody tank top, bra, and under her left fingernails? Now, it's not just Doug Dietrich's DNA. It's a Y chromosome, so it could be Doug or it could be Dylan. It does make sense why Dylan's DNA would be on Nicole's bra, because she was breastfeeding. We concede that. We're not trying to argue that. On the interior of the cup, that makes sense. The exterior of the cup, maybe it can get there. The clasp, we're starting to make less sense. Let's talk about underneath Nicole's left fingernails.
Did you just say
Blood
it's starting to
was
make
there.
less sense?
And that same DNA.
Babies don't touch
I don't think the state's trying to say
out
Dylan
of
was
the
there.
bra, the
It was
clasp
Doug's
of the
DNA.
bra, their hands don't go
How about on
around.
her bloody tank top? Same scenario. Doug's DNA was there. Don't think they're trying to say Dylan's was. But maybe most damning to their case, on the interior and exterior of Nicole's bloody underwear that you saw today. How was that explained? Unless Doug Dietrich was there. Doug Dietrich confessed. She hit her head. We
they
get
had
all
a-
of these clues that show you that this isn't some
They were in
open
a
and shut case
relationship?
like the state said. They wanted to rest, apparently, after the DNA and after the Google data.
They
They bear the burden in this case.
they've had coitus
There's no
before.
explanation for why that DNA would be
He
there.
could have
Kevin Scott told
touched
you it's not like those
DNA'd
clothes appear to have recently
her
been washed that
bra
would mix that DNA.
before.
There's no explanation for why Doug's Dietrich would be on the exterior and interior of Nicole's bloody underwear.
I mean, there's
Now these
there's
boards
plenty
and
of
these
reasons.
things that I've talked about, these are just problems or holes in the state's case. These are just pieces that don't make sense on their version of events. Each one is a piece, but when you take them all together, they grow into something much larger. This is just a hole in their case. You can't forget that this isn't even including all of the testimony that George Burch provided. He fills those holes of his own. He
No, he
provided
doesn't.
his story. He told you what happened on that night. Now, when the prosecutor is cross-examining George, there's a reason why attorneys start to yell and why they start to build their voice, why they suddenly stand up and start pointing when they haven't done that the entire time. There's a reason why you start to do this, because you're only looking for an emotional reaction,
He didn't do that.
because you don't have the facts, because
He
you
didn't
don't
yell.
have the smoking gun. You don't have that. You yell, you try to get a reaction. George showed emotion. It was probably the most tragic day of his life, and he was being called a murderer, and he knew he should have called the police.
Oh,
So yeah,
poor
he showed
George.
emotion, as he should. I know somebody who was on the stand that didn't show much emotion at all. Now the state
That's
is going
a
to get a
fucking
chance
lie.
to come back up and talk to you again. I'm not going to get that chance. Nobody else from the defense team is going to get that chance. There's a reason for that. That's because we and Mr. Burch bear no burden in this case. The state bears that burden, and it's a very large burden. And the judge has told you, if there's a reasonable hypothesis of the facts that can reconcile with the evidence of Mr. Burch being not guilty, you should return a verdict of not guilty. As we sit here right now,
I love watching closing
You are literally
arguments and
surrounded
opening
by
statements
doubt.
because you just
are surrounded
listen
by
to these
reasonable doubt.
people
that's why you
say
must
a
return
bunch
a
of
verdict
dumb shit.
of not guilty.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm very glad that Mr. Sugar chose to end his address to you by telling you that George Burch, his client, was able to come in front of you and fill in all of the gaps, all of the holes in the disjointed, scattered puzzle pieces of confusion that the defense is trying to present to you as some sort of reasonable explanation for why George Burch's DNA is all over Nicole, or why George Burch is the only person that we have evidence of that is at all of the major crime scenes. He filled in the gaps, he plugged in the holes, he prepared a scripted 3-hour direct examination to fill in every gap. And ask yourselves about his demeanor. Assess his credibility. Compare what he did on direct to what he did on cross. And is cross-examination difficult, and is it my role in part to make it difficult? Absolutely. But what else is difficult? Remembering things that didn't happen.
Mhm.
Ask yourselves about how scripted and how prepared he looked on that direct examination. They took 2 hours to walk you through an inane recitation of going to McDonald's on the way home from Chicago, to try to build up for you this man of great character who went to church and came from a great community just like yours. A community where you don't tell the police anything or you'll get killed. A community he fled and left behind his wife and his children, this wonderful family man, this terrific dad who absconds probation in Virginia and flees to Wisconsin, away from his kids, away from the wife to whom he's still married. Such a wonderful father. That's fantastic. He filled in the holes with gibberish, with an utter absurdity of a tale.
Indeed,
All of
he
the
did.
information about Doug Dietrich, all of it that they want to throw at you, is utterly irrelevant unless you believe his story. Because his story is the only thing that connects Doug to this crime. The only thing. They accused the state of ignoring Doug Dietrich and saying that we didn't acknowledge that Doug Dietrich was an aspect that we needed to address. We spent 3 days worth of testimony on Doug Dietrich. We called Doug Dietrich. We called his friends. We called the officers who dealt with the initial part of the investigation. The state presented that evidence to you. We didn't hide from it. We didn't ignore it. You heard that he was arrested. You heard that he was investigated. You heard that the evidence excluded him. They want you to look at speculation and conjecture and all of the things that lead to the wrongful convictions that Mr. Sugar mentioned in his closing statement. Look at the story he told you. The story he told you is exactly what the state did in this case. Do we believe that Doug was involved at the beginning of the case? Yes, absolutely. Detective Slinger arrested him. And then he did exactly what Mr. Sugar implored that you do. We continued to investigate every aspect of this case. We didn't find surveillance video, but we found the next best thing. We found George Burch's DNA on Nicole's sock and no reasonable explanation for it to be there. There's no connection between these two people. And then we went on to find 16 different spots on her body where George Burch's DNA is present and Doug Dietrich's DNA is excluded. And absolutely listen to what Kevin Scott told you about DNA and how it's transferred. It's transferred generally with sustained contact, with consistent contact with a particular area. It's more likely to transfer in those circumstances. You saw Nicole's body. You saw those pictures. You know about the injuries. You know how brutal this attack was. She was strangled. She was beaten. There was persistent, consistent contact with her body. And none of Doug's DNA transferred to those areas? That doesn't make any sense. That's not reasonable. That's not logical. It's inconsistent with the truth. George Burch's DNA transferred to those areas because he's the one who had all that contact with her. And how does he explain it? By creating an utter fallacy, a fantasy that he doesn't tell to anyone until he takes this stand after hearing all of the evidence presented to you over the course of 8 days. He needs an explanation. Just like he needed an explanation for why he didn't call. I didn't call because I'm on probation. I was absconding. Or you don't tell people where I'm from. You don't call because you're guilty. And you know you're going to be found guilty. If he really didn't do this, whose DNA would he have suspected would have been on that body? The killer. You'd alert them right away. Let the authorities get out there and find the DNA of the person who did this. Find that murder weapon. Look at that scene. Find all your evidence. He would have come forward right away and allowed police to investigate this and exonerate them. He just showed up at their door with the bloody clothes and said, look, take these. The person who killed this woman had to have touched them. And here's where her body is. Go find your evidence. Didn't do any of that. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't tell his father figure, Ed Jackson. He didn't tell his girlfriend, Jordan Schuyler. He didn't tell the other two gentlemen that he lived with. He certainly didn't tell the police. Not even an anonymous call. Not even an anonymous tip. Go find this body. She might even be alive. Mr. Sugar talked to you about this tragic event that he went through. It was a tragedy. It was a traumatic event. If you believe Mr. Burch's story, he was assaulted, hit in the head so hard that he was knocked out for God knows how long. Despite being knocked out, he has a specific, particular, step-by-step, blow-by-blow explanation of everything that he did. Why? Because it's crafted to explain the evidence in the case. Not because he remembers it. Think about how disorienting that would be. Struck in the head to the point where you are knocked out cold. But then he immediately woke up and he's very apparent. He knows his surroundings, right? I know where Doug is. I know exactly how many feet he is behind me. You see him in the rearview mirror. with the dome light that came on, and it didn't work on cross-examination. Of course, the dome light works on direct, but it doesn't work on cross because it was inconsistent, right? Just like when the defense presents their case, the lighting is perfect. It's wonderful. Doug can see outside and immediately is going to make out that that's his girlfriend in the car with George. But then when we asked Mr. Burch about why he didn't see Doug, well, it's a dark area. It's a dark area over there. You can't see very well. Right? So George couldn't see Doug from 15 feet away. Doug's off to the right, 120 feet away inside his house, not even able to access the windows. But he's going to be able to see that George Burch is in the car having sex with Nikki. How's he even going to tell that's Nikki? And I love their presentation of Doug. Like, figure out, what's your argument? Is he the drunk, stupid guy at the bar? Or is he a cold, calculating killer? He isn't both. He can't be both. They're giving you pieces to a puzzle.
Exactly.
The problem is they aren't the same puzzle.
Which is
They're
a
giving you pieces to 10 different irrelevant puzzles and asking you to throw them together and find a reasonable doubt. That's not what happened here. Doug was drunk that night. There's no question about it. You had testimony from everybody who was with him at the bar. Doug had been drinking. Doug had been doing a lot of shots. The guy that the defense dragged in to give you testimony, Max, he told you, yeah, I thought I was going to get left at the bar with drunk Doug because he's sitting at the bar having another drink. If Doug didn't seem to care about Nikki that night and seemed to find her, then why is he suddenly so pissed off, as the defense said in their opening statement, when he finds her?
fair.
If he was guilty of anything, it was guilty of not caring enough. When did he flip this switch into this violent, rageful, jealous boyfriend that they presented to you in opening? Go back to that opening. That opening isn't evidence. That opening is their map, their
I
roadmap.
didn't care.
Ask yourselves, check the box. What from that roadmap that they gave you did they
Cared too
actually
much.
demonstrate?
And that's why you
Where did they
killed
show Doug being angry? Where did they show a fight at the watering hole? Who told you about a fight at the watering hole? No one. Everyone told you that they got along fine at the watering hole. And Doug never even saw Nikki after the watering hole. They were never together. The only person who ever suggests that the two of them were together after the watering hole is that guy right there.
Remember
The guy with the single most incentive to lie to you about what happened in this
He
case.
did. He's just like
The only guy who had
"Man,
criminal convictions on
be
the record.
crazy,
considered for his
yo."
credibility. That's the only guy who says that
That's
they're
it.
ever together after the watering hole. And yeah, you saw Nikki's text messages. They were upset.
Doug wasn't
She was upset at Doug.
mad.
You also saw Doug's responses. LOL, Nikki, knock it off. Call me, please. Right? And that's after Nikki sends a slew of text messages. And Doug sends a few in response. And they're calm. Dallas Kennedy, who pretty clear everyone saw Dallas. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be testifying in court on this case. She said that Doug looked like he was trying to calm Nikki down. He was calm that night. He was drunk. If anything, he wasn't very attentive, that's for sure. When did he flip into this jealous, rageful, horrible individual? When did he turn into a calculated killer who took great lengths to cover up his crime? To cover up his
I
crime,
don't know.
he left the flipping murder
Dropped my ears.
weapon outside in front of his house for 2 days. Are you kidding me? There's no way that Doug was a calculated killer covering up his crime. All this stuff with the car, that's a red herring. That's way off in left field. You got the information from Progressive. That car didn't move. You had testimony from Don Chick, who's going to say, oh, I saw this car in the driveway with a blonde woman. Okay, maybe it was Friday, Don, when Nikki was out in her own car. Nikki's a blonde woman. It was noon. She went to get gas. She went out and did rummage sale. Dallas told you that. Maybe his day was wrong. We know that car didn't move. And even if it moved, so what? It moved to do what? To cover up this crime? He would cover up the crime, but leave the murder scene and leave the murder weapon in front of his house for 2 days? Police didn't find it until May 23rd. That's not a cold, calculated killer. It makes no sense. It's utterly irrational. It's unreasonable. And they want you to believe that Doug would have hid this body in Hoffman Road because it's an area that he knows well. That the only way that someone would end up there is if they know where that field is. You're all citizens of Brown County. You saw the maps. Ask yourself about that location. You turn right out of the subdivision. You don't take the first left because that's the area it just came from, and you know that there's a school there and businesses there and it's well lit. You go to the next left. What do you see? What do you see all your way down GV? You see open field on the left. Open field. What am I going to do? I got to get rid of this body. I'm going to turn left the first chance I get. Where's the first chance you can turn left? Hoffman Road. You're speeding. You're going faster, right? Okay, that's a 6-minute drive. Assuming the speed limit, he's got a dead body in his car. He's probably going a little faster than the speed limit. I need to find a place to get rid of this body. I turn left. I go up Hoffman Road. And what do I see? Sheriff's office on the right, but they're not stopped there. Hotel on the left. I keep going straight. What do I wait until? First clearing where I see some trees, and then there's no houses on the right. That's where we are on Hoffman Road. That's where he turned in. That's where he dumped the body. And ask yourself about that location, Dad. He's the one who's there. He's the one who's 9 feet away from that dump site, 9 feet away, where he admits he's the one who brutally brought Nikki to her end and says he threw her over and took off running, right? Took off running and went so darn fast that he traveled 82 feet in 15 seconds. After he's the one who testified that he turned the damn car around already. So the car was turned around and headed out, and he's in such a rush to get away from Doug that he goes 82 feet in 15 seconds? What's he really doing? Probably plugging in the GPS on the way home. I don't get out of here. Just dump this body. I gotta get home. Doug Dietrich wouldn't bring a body to the middle of town, half a mile from the family restaurant where he goes with his family to have dinner, in the middle of a subdivision half a mile up the way. Doug Dietrich, this calculated killer that they want to tell you about, who so carefully cleans up the next day, but he didn't just take a left out of the subdivision and go off into rural Rockland. And Doug Dietrich, this calculated killer, this angry, vicious boyfriend, kills Nikki, and she's laying there dead. And according to his story, Doug's just patiently waiting for George to wake up. Hey, man, can you help me move this body? How ridiculous is that? If Doug is this angry, rageful, jealous boyfriend, he doesn't even hit him. George is out cold on the ground, and you saw what was done to Nicole. That's brutal. So if you believe that Doug did that to Nicole, he left George Burch utterly unharmed, it's absurd. He would have been just as pissed as the guy who's having sex with his girlfriend. He'd have gone right after George, too. He sure as hell wouldn't have enlisted a complete stranger to help him move a body and then let him get away. It's nonsense. It is fiction. It's not even fiction. It's fiction makes sense. You would reject this as fiction. There's holes. You want to hear about holes in a story? Here's a hole in Mr. Burch's story. How did those clothes get so darn bloody on the outside? Where did that blood come from? Every item of clothing is blood soaked. That's how Nicole's pants were on the roadside. They're inside out. There is blood in the crotch area of those underwear. What is that from? That's from his forcible sexual assault. He admits he's the one who penetrated her. And she has all these internal injuries, blood in her vaginal wall, blood on the inside of her underwear. Her pants are inside out. If her pants are inside out, how did the outside of those pants get all that blood, all that hair, all that dirt, if they're off in his consensual fantasy encounter that he had in the back of that car? Because that's what he told you. Her pants were off, her legs were off, we were having a great time. No, that's disgusting. It's harmful to her reputation. It's offensive, and it's untrue.
Yes,
that's not what happened.
sir.
What happened is he forced himself on her, and she struggled, and it hurt, and it caused her to bleed. And that blood from the inside of her underwear is a result of those injuries that he inflicted. And then when he killed her, and he dragged her along the street, and he dragged her through the field, she got blood and dirt and hair on the outside of her pants, and they're filthy because they were on her when she was assaulted, just like her shirt was, just like her tank top was. It's not this sexual fantasy that this man has. She struggled, she resisted, he punished her for it. And the evidence tells you that. We absolutely bear the burden in this case. We bear the burden of proving this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. What is a reasonable doubt? It's based on reason and common sense, arising from a fair and rational consideration of the evidence, or lack of evidence. It is a doubt that would cause a person of ordinary prudence, which is you. You are an ordinary, reasonable person. It's not based on guesswork or speculation. It's not based on the fear that you'll get it wrong that Mr. Sugar wanted to tell you about. Maybe you wrongfully convict someone. It's not based on fear or speculation. It's based on evidence. You are not to search for doubt. You are to search for the truth. The only reasonable explanation, the only truth in this case, is that George killed. He is at all 4 of the crime scenes in this case. He picked her up and brought her home from the bar. He brought her in front of the home on Berkeley where she was killed. He brought her to her final resting place in the field on Hoffman Road, and he dumped her clothes on 172. Half of that, 3/4 of it, he admits to. And as long as we're talking about standard detective techniques, standard interview practice, that if a person admits to all key events except the one thing that implicates them, that's what they're hiding. They're only hiding the truth as to what happened. He admits to everything else. He admits to picking her up at the bar. He admits to wanting to have sex with her. He admits to bringing her home to Berkeley Road where they did have sex. He admits to penetrating her. He admits essentially that he caused those injuries, although he'll say it's the result of consensual activity. He admits to hauling and dumping her body and dumping her clothes. The only thing he's not going to admit to is whatever happened when he was knocked out cold. 6'7", 260-pound George Burch knocked out cold by something that didn't even create a mark in his head, right? Well, it was sore, but it wasn't a mark. Why wasn't it a mark? Because the people would have seen it. He has an explanation for everything. Well, not everything. Not a reasonable explanation. He has an explanation. Don't let him use that excuse to get out of what he did.
It leaves the mark, right?
Follow the path. Follow the evidence that's been
In all the
presented in this case.
movies, it leaves the
That
mark.
path leads to one place: his home, his guilt. That is the man that killed Nicole Vanderhyde.
Just saying.
The man that met this woman in a bar and admitted by his own account that dumping her body in that field looks like this the next day.
God.
Who does that? Who looks like this the next day? Somebody capable of doing this. This is a planned trip. So, hey, I know, sure, my version is I was assaulted in the back of the head and made to do this horrible, traumatic thing. Mr. Sugar told you this was the most traumatic day of his life. Sure looks like it. This is him the next day. Not calling the police, not telling anybody about it. That's him the next day.
Dude back there in the red tie is
no way
asleep.
his story is true, and you know it.
Buddy, I feel
Follow
you.
the evidence. It will lead you down the path of truth. The evidence leads you to the path of truth, and so does his story. It leads you to the very same place, his guilt. And that's why we're asking that you return a verdict guilty for first-degree intentional homicide for George Burch. Bring justice to Nikki and her family.
Yes, sir.
And let's be seated.
Verdict time.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've been advised that you've reached a verdict. Is that correct? Then if you would
I think
pass the
they
verdict
were
forms
out
over to the
for
bailiff.
like between an hour and 3 hours.
State of Wisconsin versus George Stephen Burch, Brown County case 16C.
Hold on. Let me look for real. Three hours. Jurors deliberated just over 3 hours. Yeah.
PF 1309. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, George Stephen Burch, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, is charged in the information. It is signed by our foreperson and dated this first day of March, 2018. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? They're saying yes and shaking their heads. Does either party wish to have the jury polled?
Yes, yes.
All right. There's a right to have the jury polled at this time, and this is how it will work. The juror right to the left of the bailiff. If that is your verdict, just you may say, yes, this is my verdict. If not, you can answer, no, this is not my verdict, and we'll just go down the row and around. So is this your verdict?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have one
There you
last
go.
instruction to read to you.
Unanimous.
Your service in this case is completed. And on behalf of the court, our court staff, and the citizens of Brown County, we greatly appreciate your service and the personal
Brown chicken, brown
sacrifice
cow.
that you've made in fulfilling your duties as responsible citizens. You have been a very attentive and patient jury, a positive one. You do not have to answer any questions about this case now from anyone
That's
other
her
than the
mama.
court. There is no requirement that you maintain
Doug.
secrecy concerning what happened in the jury room, but you do not have to discuss this
Friends.
case with anyone or answer
I
any
don't know
questions
who all
about it.
these people are.
If you care to do so, you may. It is your decision. Once again, thank you. Have a good evening, and you are
They're all
excused.
friends
Let us stand
and
for the jury.
family.
Let's be seated, everyone. Attorney Lassay, do you have a motion at this time?
Move for the court to enter judgment of conviction based on the jury's verdict.
Any objection, Attorney Schucker?
Yes, Judge, we would make a motion for the court to enter a judgment of not guilty, notwithstanding the verdict of the jury.
Okay, based upon the court's review of the evidence, the standard has to be applied at this time and the jury verdict that the court's received. I'm going to deny that motion. And the court will adjudicate George Stephen Burch guilty of first-degree intentional homicide contrary to section 940.01 sub 1 sub A of the Wisconsin statutes. And that conviction is entered this first day of March 2018. We need to set a scheduling day for sentencing. I'm thinking it's going to be about 8 to 10 weeks out. The court will order a pre-sentence investigation. I'd also indicate at this time, in light of this conviction and the verdict of the court, verdict of the jury, bond is revoked. And I'd be looking at the first or second week of May. I guess maybe it's early at this time, but
Nikki was a seasoned mom with 2 grade school kids. She had stated she had been so young, and it was almost a decade ago when her 2 children were born.
That's her mama. That's her mommy giving a statement at the sentencing.
That this was to be an exciting new experience for Nikki also, which she was looking forward to. I continued to see my son's goofy grin, ear to ear, endless, as he held his newborn son. He wanted and was a hands-on daddy from the very beginning, and is to this very day. I was there at the house to welcome Triple D home. All 4 generations of the Dietrich family were there. Cowboy Grandpa,
Oh, maybe
Papa,
this is
Donna,
his
and
mom.
Dylan. Nikki and Doug both wanted and felt breastfeeding would be the best method to feed and nurture baby Dylan. And after a
This is
short learning
Doug's
curve,
mom.
Mama and baby fell into a natural, comfortable nursing pattern. This new family was not only thriving, but growing stronger daily. I communicated almost daily with either Doug or Nikki or both. I saw them often after Dylan's birth. I saw them at their worst, and I saw them at their best. Infants are notorious for disrupting the entire family's sleep, and Dylan was no exception. Infants are also demanding on time, which I observed both parents taking responsibility. Nikki was a strong advocate for the family bed concept, so most of the time Dylan nursed and slept with them. Diaper changes were Daddy's area of expertise, and nursings were Mama's. Doug followed Nikki's lead since she was comfortable with her previous parenting knowledge. I was proud of both of them. I did offer advice, try to stop me, but this concept of sound restful sleep would be disturbed other than if baby had his own bed and out of their room. All in all, it was a long, sleepless winter for both. Nikki had wanted both of them to be home together for an extended maternity leave window, so they were together a lot. As the months passed, Dylan was growing into a healthy, happy 6-month-old. He had just started teething and had his first solid taste of solid food and found, in addition to his mama milk, which we would jokingly always call it liquid gold. As both were getting back into the routine of work, if one was working, the other one was with Dylan. When needed, I was to be the sitter. My husband and I were going to treat to a 6-month baby photo shoot. Nikki did some quick research and decided where, and the date was set. She approached me and asked me if she could have an addition to the Dylan pictures, if she could have some of just Doug and Dylan together. She wanted to give them to Doug as a surprise Father's Day gift in June. I had just recently purchased a new camera, since I had just celebrated my second grand gift's arrival May 2nd, my first granddaughter. Our family was so excited, for now we had one of each, a little boy and a little girl, only 6 months apart. They would be so close. Let the family fun begin. It was spring. In the month of May. It was our first Mother's Day together. Both my sons and their families were around our dinner table. It was Nikki's first Mother's Day as Dylan's mama. It was mine first as grandma. Everyone was so happy and making plans for summer family activities. That week, we would be doing Dylan's 6-month professional photo shoot, my monthly grand gift photo shoot. This month's theme would have been April showers bring May flowers. In my attempt to take Nikki and Doug's first family photo with the 3 children around my flowering crab tree that should have been in full bloom that next week. These were the times I had dreamed and waited for my family, now grandbabies, and a house full of laughter. I share this with you so you could know my state of mind and how Dylan's parents were feeling, acting, and planning for their future together. At this time, I want to share this photo. It's very special to all of us. It was taken that Mother's Day. It is to be the last family photo that ever exists for Dylan. It's just a simple snapshot. It's not even really in focus, but it's all we have. You may note, when you look at that, Nikki's wearing the same outfit she wore when she was murdered, minus the blood stain. This all happened just days prior to May 21st, 2016, when George S. Burch entered into our lives. Nothing would ever be the same again. For me, Dylan, my son, or my entire family. Why am I qualified to be a voice for Dylan? Let me continue. I was the first person Nikki asked to watch Dylan that night for the concert outing. I had a conflict, so other arrangements had to be made. I felt bad turning them down, since I have been suggesting they both get out, get away from baby, go have some fun, see some friends. Unexpectedly, our descent into hell began. Dylan's daddy notified us, worried that Nikki had not returned home yet from last night's outing. I tried to reassure him that I was sure she was probably just still sleeping somewhere at a friend's home and would be home soon. He needed us to come, so we drove over. I heard and witnessed the concern. I was there when he called the police and reported Nikki missing. I was there holding Dylan when police arrived to take the report. I was there to take care of Dylan when police asked Doug to come to the police station. I was there to pack up Dylan in the middle of the night when police said we could go pick up Doug. I was there to witness my son's anguish as he came out from that station because they had told him they thought it was her body. I was there to cry. I was there to weep. It just couldn't be true. We didn't want to believe it. I tried to comfort Dylan after a bottle. Nothing worked. It was as if Dylan knew Mama was gone. The only thing that would comfort Dylan was lying on his daddy's chest, which he had done so many times before that night. I continued to listen to my son's endless sobbing as Dylan laid on his chest. Why? What had happened to Nikki? I was there to start weaning Dylan from his mother's breast milk since there would be no more. I was there when the police came to my door to arrest my son. My head was spinning. My heart was aching for Nikki and now Doug, both gone. What was going on? Dylan now had no mama or daddy. To say I was confused is putting it mild. I was horrified, afraid, numb, and in pain. I felt helpless. I experienced panic attacks. I experienced anxiety attacks. I was frustrated, afraid to trust. I could not sleep. I would have nightmares, wake up sweating. I couldn't breathe. I wouldn't attend outings that I would have loved to attend. I lost interest in things I loved doing. I was depressed. I had to make myself get out of bed. I would avoid friends and family. I cried all the time. I had unreasonable fears. I couldn't stop thinking about Nikki, what was done to her, Doug, Dylan, and her other two children. I wondered, what if I had babysat that night? Would the outcome have been different? Would my son, would his son, would all of us still have Nikki? To this very day, tears come very easily when I go to my front door. I relive the arrest. To this very day, tears come when I pass the rape and death site in a family-oriented neighborhood that Nikki and Doug loved and felt safe to raise their kids. To this day, I can't use that on-ramp without thinking about Burch's actions. I have a hard time driving on Hoffman Road, the site where Burch threw Nikki away like she didn't even matter. She did matter. We loved her and we miss her. Dylan will never remember those first months he had a mother. Dylan will never get to hear her laugh or experience that big smile. Dylan will never get to hear her say, I love you to the moon and back. Dylan will never remember how she always combed through that round then fuzzy head of hair each time she left him. Dylan will never have the opportunity to hear her advice or have her guidance. Gone forever are the opportunities for memories, holidays, birthdays, vacations, proms, weddings, even a chance for Nikki to experience the joy of becoming a grandmother herself years from now. Burch tried to take Dylan's mother and father's reputation with no respect for her children. Dylan will never have a childhood like the one you described yourself as having. Burch robbed Dylan of all this and more. Think about all the children his actions have damaged. He knew she had children. He just didn't care. Yes, Nikki's own three, a niece, a nephew, the two boys who found her body, children in the neighborhood and surrounding areas. What about your own kids? He has no conscience, no soul. He shows no remorse. He should be made accountable for all the emotional injuries. This crime has made me question my faith. Being Catholic, I was taught not to hate and to forgive. I believe I'm experiencing hate for the first time and I don't like it. As far as forgiveness, I don't know if I'll ever get there. We have all been violated. We have had our privacy taken. Vicky has had to bury a child due to Burch's sick, perverted, and violent actions. This was no accident. He is a predator, plain and simple. He has no human-worthy qualities. I would call him an animal, but I would be insulting the animal kingdom. We have had our lives disrupted, damaged, and changed. We respond to life differently now, and not always for the best. He has left his bloody mark on the entire community as well. It was torture to listen to his volumes of lies, fiction, sex. I knew her well enough, and believe me, she would have wanted me to tell you she didn't want sex from him. Oh, wait, I think she did tell us that herself with the number and type of injuries he gave her. 41? No. 141? No. 241, if I remember correctly. The reality was she must have found him so disgusting, she would have rather taken a beating from him than to have sex with him. Rape is not about sex. It's a violent act of hatred and power. This crime shows his inadequacies as a real man. He's a male, not a man. Pleasuring her? You made me sick. I doubt he's even able to sexually perform if the female isn't drunk, drugged, or unconscious. Breathing wasn't even required. But in the end, the truth and the facts won. Facts don't lie. We had Nikki on our side, guiding and leading the breadcrumbs right to him. She was determined not to let him get away with this. She fought him hard alive and in death. Mr. Burch didn't just kill Nikki, he destroyed a young family with so many hopes and dreams of others. I'm a part of Dylan's daily care and will be for my entire life. I am sure I'll be a part of the delicate explaining and emotional support when the time comes when Dylan asks Daddy why he doesn't have a mommy here and why she's in heaven, with the explanations getting more detailed over time as he grows up. And the reality and the pain will again surface and make a new wound. So many innocent lives changed forever. I ask you today to please give an innocent little boy and myself, as well as others, the peace of mind and the physical security that Mr. Burch never gets the opportunity to experience any free life he would have remaining after serving time. Punish him with the harshest sentence, life with no parole. And note, if he ever is given parole, we will be there at each and every hearing, whatever it takes to block that. He will kill again if given opportunity. He did this crime way too easy. And he went fishing later that day, like nothing ever happened. Oh yeah, I remember it was pre-planned. I want Mr. Burch to know that I too enjoy fishing. And each time I'm there on the water with the sun on my face and the wind in my hair, I'm going to think of you and I'm going to smile, just knowing you can't fish anymore. It's a little thing, but it does pleasure me in knowing that. One last consideration. Please don't allow him to gain anything financially in any way from this crime. The sheer brutality and disregard for human life in this crime is unthinkable. All Nikki wanted from him was a ride home, back to Doug, back to her baby. In closing, please go home today. Hug your loved ones. Tell them you love them. Show them you love them. I'm still discovering the effects of this crime, not only with myself, but through the observation of family members. I felt my family and I were dropped into hell from this crime. I am walking back. Some days I make more distance than others. It's a long, long way to walk back. You know, I got thinking, I don't know if you were ever properly welcomed here to Wisconsin the way you came here and all picking up your skirt and running scared here from Virginia. Welcome. I hope you enjoy your life sentence in one of our Wisconsin prisons. I do want to thank the DA's office, the Brown County Sheriff's Department, the Green Bay Police Department for all their dedication and hard work. Also a special thanks for your Victims Advocate Department from Karen, who was here at the very beginning and ended up helping from afar, to Kim at my side today and all the others involved. To the court, thank you. I'm not going to pretend that I understand or even like some of the things that you put us all through, but I guess it works. Thank you for allowing me this time.
And Mrs. Dietrich, for the record, your first name is?
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's
Diane.
right. Diane.
D-I-A-N-E.
Thank you,
And
Diane.
Dylan is D-Y-L-A-N.
Thank you, Diane. Kim, can I have that photograph, please?
Your Honor, I'm reading a statement on behalf of.
Good job,
of
lady.
Mrs. Dietrich.
All right, go ahead.
The past 2 years have been nothing short of torture for me and my family. On May 21st, I dread that day. It gives me so much anxiety knowing the pain that telling him will cause. I will have to explain how a person can be capable of so much evil and so much anger that they feel it is their right to take away another person's life. I fear and know that me telling him will steal away his innocence. He will unfortunately figure out at a young age that there are people that are truly evil in this world. Ones that can and will take someone's life without thinking much about it. I will have to explain that George Burch took away Mommy's life before he could even get a chance to know her. Besides the stories our family tells him, The only way Dylan will learn what his mommy was like will be from the media coverage and gossip surrounding this case. George Burch took the stand and said truly awful and untrue things about his mommy and daddy, and Dylan will most likely see the testimony at some point in his life. I will not only have to live with the fact that Dylan will know his mommy's life was cut short in such an awful and brutal way, but he will also find out that his daddy was first blamed for those terrible acts. I fear this could be too much for him to handle, and I'm very concerned about the damage that George Burch's heinous and me. Green Bay is a small community, and I'm certain that most people here have opinions about this case, about Nikki, me, and our families. I'm also certain that many misstatements have been said and spread throughout the town. The massive amount of local and national media attention has created a giant spotlight on every single thing any of us do. Both personally and professionally, I worry that others have and will treat us differently because of what Mr. Burch did. As you know, I was originally arrested in connection with Nikki's brutal murder. I had been killed in cold blood. Knew that I had been arrested. He decided that making me feel the loss of Nikki wasn't enough, but that I should have to endure false accusations, arrest, and mass amounts of public scrutiny. He decided to make my family suffer even more when they tried desperately to prove my innocence. After I was vindicated and George Burch was eventually arrested, he still wasn't done inflicting pain on me. I just continue with a false. He decided to try again to point the finger at me. He decided he did not want to take responsibility for his terrible acts and put me, my family, and Nikki's family through hell again. I'm so thankful that I had a guardian angel, Nikki, protecting me when I was testifying and being blamed by George Burch for her murder. I'm convinced that she was watching over Dylan, me, her family, and my family throughout this process. I know she helped to make sure that justice was done. George Burch's false accusations have affected me in very deep and real ways. I still vividly remember sitting in a jail cell while Nikki's funeral was taking place. I couldn't say my last goodbyes. I couldn't grieve with Nikki and my family. I couldn't be there for Dylan, Nikki's family, or my family. I was stuck in jail being accused of a horrific crime I didn't commit. When I was finally released, I had to endure that damage that my arrest and false accusations caused between me and Nikki's family. I had to rebuild trust and was put in the position of having people close to me question my involvement.
I hope y'all
I'm
feel
thankful
like
that Brown County law
shit.
enforcement followed the evidence and arrested the real killer, George Burch. The pain and suffering I went through is nothing compared to the pain and suffering Nikki endured. George Burch brutally raped and murdered Nikki while our son Dylan and I slept. He then discarded her in a field, threw her blood-soaked clothes on the side of the road, and went on a fishing trip that very same morning. George Burch is a monster. He should rot in prison for the rest of his life. He has proven that he does not deserve the privilege of being free ever again. He is a danger to society. The way in which he took Nikki's life and then left her in a field and then go on with his life shows his true character. George Burch not only took Nikki's life in a brutal fashion, but he then concocted a story to try and get out of taking responsibility for his actions. The fact that he would say that Nikki was consensually having sex with him in the neighborhood we live in is disgusting and shows a complete disregard for her. He also tried to blame me for Nikki's death. I'm thankful that the jury rejected his lies. The damage this has done to my family and Nikki's family is tremendous. This will always be something that we have to deal with, and the pain that Burch caused will never go away. The past 2 years I have been living in hell. I processed a range of emotions: hopelessness, disgust, isolation, devastation, and depression. I felt anxious, lost, and I longed for Nikki's touch, her comfort, help, and presence. So has our son Dylan. George Burch brutally stole that from me, and he took so much more that night. Not only has this been an unimaginable nightmare, but it's a recurring one. I know the consequences of George Burch's actions will have lifelong consequences for all involved. And now the court should impose a lifelong sanction on George Burch, with no opportunity for release, ever.
Lord.
On behalf of myself, Dylan, and Nikki, I ask that you impose the maximum sentence of life in prison. For murdering Nikki in cold blood, to putting our families in the community through a lengthy trial, George Burch has shown absolutely no remorse for the things he did. George Burch hid behind his lies. He is nothing but a coward. Your Honor, I ask the court to give George Burch the same amount of mercy he allowed Nikki. None. Please sentence him to prison for life without any chance of release. I never want my son to have to fear seeing his mommy's murderer roaming the streets free.
And that was Mr. Dietry's victim impact statement.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else wish to address the court?
Oh, yeah.
Nothing state.
Anybody from the defense, Attorney Cano?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Parties ready to present their sentencing statements?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Attorney Saunders, go ahead on behalf of the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Obviously, we're here today for probably legally and morally the most significant thing another person can do to another. Especially, as the court knows, when we've done the degree of depravity and heinousness that was exhibited in this case. And I want to thank the family for speaking here today. But obviously, they articulated the effect that this crime had on them better than I ever can. And I know it's been a long 2 years. They've come to every hearing, every meeting in our office.
Okay.
And I think the support that
Just
he has is just a
state-
testament to who she was as a person. And by all accounts,
There was an issue of Mr. Dietrich, there's pending charges, and there's maybe ABA issues. And I think that's something the court can consider. Over the court sentences Mr. Burch. But we're asking the court to consider make him eligible for parole within 25 to 30 years. Now, the court has heard the trial, heard a lot of noise, a lot of media coverage. The court received a lot of letters. Some of those letters, I don't know whether they qualify under the victim statute. Some of the letters, I can't tell where they come from. But I do know that some of them appear to be from another state in which he was arrested and charged with a crime and was acquitted. And with all due respect to that jury, I would ask the court to afford those letters the proper weight. It appears that Mr. Burch was judge. The court has heard the trial,
Think about the fact that George Burch came to Wisconsin and in less than 6 months left a trail of death and destruction that is unacceptable. What chance did he give Nikki? The scars that have been inflicted run very deep. This monster Burch doesn't deserve to live, let alone be eligible for parole. Dylan will never know who his mother was. Doug Dietrich not only lost the mother of his child, but was put through hell during the whole process. Doug was arrested for something he had nothing to do with. These families have gone through hell and back many, many times. A good, upstanding family in the community has been dragged through the depths of hell. Nikki won't get a second chance. Why should he? Mr. Burch can't come into our community and so senselessly rape and murder my friend and think he can get away with it. He concocted a ridiculous story where he's the victim, put the blame on someone else.
That was a true
Received a
example of a
second set of
narcissist.
letters talking about Nikki and how she made life fun, gave happiness everywhere she went. Because of what Mr. Burch did, our family will never be the same. It sickened me to have Mr. Burch tell his lies in front of families, the court, and the rest of the world, and how Nikki wanted it. There's a letter here that says, Nikki showed me how to be an amazing parent, how to keep smiling even through hard times. We've all lost a place or a piece of our hearts that we will never get back. Nikki was a strong, smart, interesting person, and she had a tremendous amount of patience. Court has reviewed all of those letters. All those letters are written on behalf of Nicole Vanderheiden. I didn't receive any letters on behalf of Mr. Burch, which in some ways is sad and maybe telling. Chris, doesn't
Well,
matter how many letters the court receives on one side or the other. You know, I'm looking at
Nobody
this
said
photo.
nothing
Here.
in
This is a beautiful
print.
photo of Nicole, Mr. Dietrich, and Dylan. And how many photos are like this in our community? You know, thousands. We have thousands of families like this. And this family is destroyed. It's ruined. It'll never be like this again. And as I was thinking about today's sentencing, it's a powerful memory to know how, like, one decision, one fateful decision can change your life forever. It might be your decision which way you decide to go home from work one day. It might be someone else's decision, like, what if Mr. Burch had decided to stay in Virginia? it's also a reminder of just how one person can change people's lives forever for the worse
Yep.
and ruin a whole family's life. It could be a drug dealer, it could be a drunk driver, or it could be a murderer, or as the family would say, a monster. And now we have sentencing today. We had a long trial. It was difficult for everybody. And this is the part of the system where we have sentencing. What the court wishes it had was a magic wand. What the court wishes it had was a time machine. If we had the perfect world, we just wave that wand and we turn the clock back to May 20th, 2016. And Nicole would be returned to her family, and we'd happily send Mr. Burch back to Virginia. That's what I wish we could do, but we don't live in that perfect world. We live in the real world. And we live in the confines of an oftentimes imperfect justice system, and we do the best we can. So we have a sentencing today. And Mr. Attorney Kondo is right. There's a lot of emotion here. Just like the jury is instructed in the burden of proof instruction, you are not to make your decision based upon emotion or sympathy. A judge is not to make a sentencing decision on emotion. You have to somehow take a step back and dispassionately review the facts of the case and apply it to the sentencing factors and come up with a fair and rational sentence.
That would be hard.
That's what the court's doing. And we have today. So I ask people to indulge the court as I make that record in terms of how the court's arrived at to its sentencing, including those factors. And those factors were enumerated in the case, State versus Gallium, 285 with second 473. It's a Court of Appeals case. So whenever, in any case, the court has to look at the severity of the offense, the character of the defendant, and the need to protect the public. And there are other decisions that talk about other goals of the criminal justice system and sentencing, rehabilitation of the defendant. Attorney Kano talked about that. Protection of the public, deterrence, Attorney Saunders talked about that, and punishment. Those are all goals and laudable goals of the criminal justice system. We've had a full and fair trial. Mr. Burch received a full and fair trial. People probably know more about this case than 99% of the other cases that come through the criminal justice system. And again, the court has to make its record today. A sentence isn't as simple as just lock the door and throw away the key. And we don't live in a society where it's an eye for an eye, as much as that might seem tempting. So we have to go through these factors, these sentencing factors. First of all, Mr. Burch has been convicted of first-degree intentional homicide. Attorney Kano's right. There are a lot of issues surrounding this case, a lot of technology issues involving Mr. Dietrich, but just for the record, Mr. Burch is guilty of this offense, pure and simple. The court heard all the evidence. The jury found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The scientific evidence was overwhelming, and quite frankly, Mr. Burch's story made no sense. He's guilty.
Yes,
Nobody should have any
sir.
doubt about that. So we have to talk about the severity of this offense, and I apologize to the family, but I have to make my record here. We have to talk about what a violent crime this was. I'm just going to refer to the pre-sentence investigation. The family's been traumatized numerous times. It's going to hurt one more time. But Nicole suffered significant blunt force trauma to the left side of her face, skull fracture, broken jaw, ligature marks around her neck, numerous internal injuries, esophagus, trachea, the neck. She died from blunt force trauma to her head and from strangulation. And she was transported to a field after being killed. And what really struck me when I heard all of this evidence, and it was 241 separate injuries, I heard that distinctly, but also where her body was found, and she had her one arm on top of another, and there was blood splatter over the rest of her body. I mean, what had happened was that she was already dead or dying, and Mr. Burch either stomped on her head or kicked her in the head.
Mm.
That kind of brutality is frightening. It's really incomprehensible. How angry do you have to be to do something like that? That's what the physical evidence demonstrated. Now, I've grown up in this community, and I've been here in the criminal justice system for 31 years. And I've seen a lot of pain and a lot of terrible cases. We're not going to go through those, but one case involved someone who was beaten badly in a paper mill and thrown into a vat, a terrible death. I also had another trial where somebody was accosted in a bar by a group of bikers and suffered tremendous injury and was abused and had her throat slit.
Jesus.
Those were terrible crimes. One crime I can remember, there were 13 areas of bruising on his body, and there were 89 separate areas of injury on her body. This case is 241 different areas. And the other thing is that case, that biker case, those terrible violent crimes were committed by a group of individuals. They were committed by the mentality of the mob, where people just got wound up more and more and got more and more violent. But Nicole suffered her injuries at the hands of one person, Mr. Burch. So I think it's accurate to say that this was the most brutal murder. This is the most brutal murder that has ever been committed by one person in the history of Brown County. That's how severe this case is. She refused to have sex. The witnesses are right. And then when Mr. Burch got physical, she resisted and she fought. And as the family said in some correspondence, she said no, fought back, and was killed because she was exercising her right to say no. And she did suffer. It's not a bullet through the head and it's instantaneous death. She suffered. And she must have been greatly frightened those last few moments of her life, thinking, how can this be happening to me? All I want to do is go home to my son. That's all I wanted to do. That's how severe this case is. And then in terms of severity, the impact on the family, we've heard of that. It would be a severe case even if this was somebody from St. John the Evangelist Homeless Shelter who didn't have the kind of loving families that Nicole had. But what about the impact on Nicole and on the families? In terms of Nicole, we've heard about Nicole. And it's important for the community to know about Nicole, about this person who was a teacher, one of the most honorable professions there is, who was a teacher because she enjoyed seeing kids learn things. And the court can see in photos and has heard that she was almost always smiling. What a beautiful attribute that is. I'm sure she was someone who would light up a room. We can all think of people who never smile. She was a smiler. She was a volunteer. She was a good person, but most importantly, she was very good at the most important job any of us can ever have, and that's being a parent. She was a parent to 3 beautiful children, including little Dylan. She was a loving and active mother. We heard about that today. And her children, Michaela, Tyler, and Dylan. So Nicole was the immediate victim, but then look at what it's done to her families. Look what it's done to her parents. You know, parents should never have to bury a child. Sometimes it happens. But never should they ever have to do that under these circumstances. And then the residuals that flowed from this terrible act. It's like you said, she doesn't even get to see her grandkids as much. That's a direct result of Mr. Burch's actions. Your grandparents are an extremely important, they're extremely important people in every child's life, and that's been compromised for the kids because of what Mr. Burch did. The father says that his daughter's murder is constantly on his brain. I have no doubt of that. The mother, her heart aches every day. Today she said, we are shells of what we used to be. He's taken so much away from us. I know people who have lost children to natural causes. They say they're never the same. It's never the same. Well, it's never the same here. And under a brutal murder like this, that's the impact, Mr. Burch, that you've had on the lives of the family. The sister, you took away her best friend. As sisters should be. She'll never be the same. She indicated at times she's not even able to breathe because there's just so much pain. The children, her children, Tyler, hurting and acting out. It's not surprising he's lost his mother. And Michaela was hurting and longing for her mother, like any daughter would. And then little Dylan, who'll never remember his mother, will never have all of those moments with his mother. And as Mr. Dietrich says, it's going to be very difficult to talk to him about what happened and why where's mom? Why isn't my mom here? I have seen a child of victims in court. Sometimes they have struggled their entire life because their parent was brutally taken away from them. And my prayer is that these children don't suffer that fate, that they are strong. I trust they'll be survivors because they have 2 good families who are supporting them and will take care of them. And of course, Nicole has had many friends and acquaintances who have suffered a great loss. And it's true. The community suffers as well. There was an old saying that I remember when I was growing up, when one member of the community suffers, we all suffer. Even if we're not that conscious of it, especially under these circumstances. And of course, there's Mr. Dietrich. He's certainly a victim here as well. He comes from a very nice family. We've heard these letters about compounding the trauma by having to be put through the ringer of a trial like this. First being accused as her killer. You took away the mother of his child, Mr. Burch. That's a terrible, terrible crime. And now he's got to step up. He's the parent in the child's life. And I pray for Mr. Dietrich as well. You better clean up the drugs in his house. I heard about that during the trial. He's got to be a role model now to his son. He's going to need the support and help of the families as well. The fact that he couldn't be at Nicole's funeral is totally unfair. He has a pain that will never go away. Mr. Dietrich is clearly has been victimized in many ways in this case. So if you look at the brutality of this case and the number of victims, look how severe this case is. That is an extremely severe crime. It's a factor that the court has to consider. The second factor is protection of the public. And this is very important. I think we all kind of take our safety for granted, don't we? We never really think about it until something happens. Years ago, we could walk down the street in Green Bay and you never thought twice about it. I'd go up to Colburn Parks, I'd walk home. Couldn't do that anymore now by yourself. We live in a different world. Growing up in this community, who could have ever thought we'd have a case like this? A random act of violence like this. It's like Heather said, she didn't think anything like this would happen in this area to a nice person. It's beautifully said. It's a random act of violence. It's like Attorney Saunders said, a lot of times we have people who are in a relationship, you have people who are involved in drug dealing and there's violence. This is someone who was just minding her own business and trying to get home. It could have been any number of people. And that should be and is extremely unsettling to this community. And let there be no doubt here, she was walking home. Now, Mr. Burch, during the trial, said, well, she came to Richard Cranium's bar where I had all these friends and everybody kind of knew me. And, you know, Mr. Burch, if that really happened, there would have been a witness on that stand. Probably more than one that would have came into this courtroom and said, yeah, big country, he was having a good old time in that bar. We didn't hear that, Mr. Burch, because it never happened. What happened is what you told those inmates in the jail. You picked her up. She was walking on the street and you picked her up. She got into your car because she needed a ride. She wanted to get home. And maybe at that point, she wasn't really keen on seeing Mr. Dietrich, but she wanted to get home to Dylan. She wanted to get home to her 6-month-old son. A simple request. And it cost her her life because of what you did. Protection of the public is extremely important in this case as well. And then there's the character of the defendant. That's the other factor that the court has to look at.
I wonder if the lawyer can get any
You know,
sanctions
I read those letters,
for
Mr.
like
Burch said there's no good in you. And we've heard that you're a
letting
monster.
him sit there and lie.
You know, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, Mr. Burch, in the sense that, you know, there's good in everybody, isn't there? Nicole was a Christian, Community Fellowship Church. She'd probably agree because we're all made in the image and likeness of God. So somehow there's good somewhere in you, Mr. Burch. There is, or there was.
Yeah.
You know, we're all born, we're all little babies, like Dylan. You were like that one day, Mr. Burch. And then we all go down these different roads of life based upon what experiences we have.
Biological
How did we
parents
end
are
up
like,
here? How did you end up here? How did all this pain get inflicted on
he's
so many people?
adopted.
You were adopted. And you were close to your dad. And your parents divorced. And it bothered you greatly, just like so many other kids are bothered when their parents are divorced. It's very human. And you were involved in sports, football, basketball, baseball, wrestling. You were human.
You were human.
There was some good there. But then
Now you're a
it's hard to
fucking
wrap that
monster.
concept around when you could brutally murder this woman, drop the body off in a field, and then 12 hours later go on a boat and be smiling like nothing happened. Like you didn't have a care in the world. How can we explain that? That isn't human. That is not normal. But we saw it. That's a fact. Those are facts.
Facts.
Your record is a factor that the court has to look at and address by both parties. Maybe it didn't have the violence that violent offenses, but there was a threat to burn a home, curse and abuse. I don't know what that is in Virginia. Destruction of private property, possession of firearm by a convicted felon, possession of marijuana, OWI, possession with intent to distribute marijuana, driving under the influence, grand larceny. And we heard somewhat about that murder out in Virginia, or that homicide case. And Mr. Burch, you're not being sentenced because of that, because you were acquitted. I don't know what the facts of that case is. Joe White, for nothing but good things about him. Although I remember when I saw that paper on the screen, it talked about him being a gang leader or a gang, but who knows what the facts are. Maybe the jury made the correct legal verdict there. The fact is it was still violent. You're still involved in violence. You're not being sentenced on that case. You're being sentenced on what you did to Nicole Vanderheiden. There are 2 outstanding warrants. There's a pending possession of heroin charge, and then there's the probation violation while you're on paper for grand larceny. There was information in the PSI from your wife. You're still legally married to Mary Burch. You married her in 2001, Mr. Burch. And she left you because of your drug use. Now, maybe there was drug use, and maybe that might explain how such brutality could take place to Nicole. Pot, heroin, pills, whatever else. She said you do have an anger problem. You get upset very easily. I heard about it in one of those pretrial motions. She said you couldn't keep your job. that you could work and keep jobs. And that was kind of similar to what happened here in Brown County. It's interesting. She said she never really got to know the real George Burch. She described you. And I don't think this is insignificant.
How come we
Mr.
didn't
Burch.
get
She
to hear
described
none
you
of
as
that?
someone who had people who at one time loved you, but over time you lost them because of your behavior.
Makes sense.
Look at the Jacksons. Ed and Linda, they befriended you. They got you a job. They got you a car. They gave you a roof over your head. They gave you a phone. And yet, within a period of months, that relationship disintegrated. Not because of them. It was
They
your
were
behavior.
no longer useful to him.
And as was pointed out, you have children as well. Daughter with Elisa Lombardo, whereabouts unknown, we never heard about her. But you have two sons. One of them, you have a Tyler too. Tyler is 16 years old. And a son named Colin, age 13. Now, Tyler doesn't want, apparently, to have anything to do with you at this point. I don't know if he knows about the case. It may have been that you just up and left without giving them any notice. You also have your son Colin, who still loves you, wants to see you. Kind of reminds me of the Maloney case. So you have two sons. You know, they're victims too. They're victims.
Well, you didn't give off that
They've been
impression of your
harmed by
other
your
son.
conduct here. Colin is never going to see you outside the confines of prison, and maybe Tyler will come around, but he's never going to have that opportunity either. Now, every pre-sentence report talks about remorse or lack of it. Every PSI talks about accepting responsibility. I can't find that here. It doesn't exist in this PSI. I don't know if it's there or not. Do I comment,
PSI,
though, about the trial?
pre-sentencing
Court is not punishing you,
investigation.
Mr. Burch, because you exercised your constitutional right to a trial. Every defendant has it. But the evidence was overwhelming. Technological evidence, even without Fitbit, was overwhelming. It's the DNA. Your DNA is all over this woman's body. And where's Dietrich's DNA? Dietrich had no DNA on her body, hardly any. The cell phone, GPS tracking. And so the family had to undergo that grueling trial and hear everything that happened.
That's
You
what
know,
I
I just
said.
a thought, Mr. Burch. You
Without
said yes
the
or no. So the
Fitbit.
manly thing would have been to say, all right, I did it. I flipped out. I did whatever. Cop will plea, do something. And step up to the plate. You chose not to do that. You still haven't done that. And part of that may be self-preservation, try to get out of it. Maybe, just maybe it's because even you know how awful a crime this is. And you can't come to grips with admitting what you did and that you are responsible for what you did to Nicole.
Well, so then you don't get parole because you
But
couldn't
what
admit
complicates things, though, is not only
to yourself.
did you just brutally murder her, but you took away her life and then you kind of tried to take away her reputation by this story of sex in the car.
Yep.
And I agree with Mrs. Dietrich. The easy out would have just been, I'm not going to fight. She did fight. She had honor. You took that away from her. So we talked about how severe the crime is. We talked about the need to protect the public, why this is such a significant case, and we talked about the character.
Okay,
of the
come on.
defendants. So now what is the appropriate sentence? It's a unique situation. You've been convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, Mr. Burch. It's automatically a life sentence. And then in chapter 973, or statute 973.014, it gives the court options. Years ago, it used to be first-degree murder. And then after about 13 and a half years, there was automatic eligibility for parole, and the defendant could go before the parole board. Then the law was changed, and then it was changed again. Now we have our current law, where one is, we call it first-degree intentional homicide.
Like I put it down in
And the
normal.
court
and it sounds like he's
has
slow
discretion.
as
The
fuck.
parole eligibility date is 20 years. If the court chooses to do that, or it can set a parole eligibility date, or it can say, I can deny it entirely and say there's no parole.
No parole.
And the court has to use the sentencing factors to determine what is the appropriate parole eligibility date. Now, of course, parole eligibility date doesn't mean anyone ever gets out. Just you say your parole eligibility date is 25, 30 years. You don't get out after 25, 30 years. You go before the parole board. Family has asked that the court sentence you to life without parole. The defense says 25 to 30 years, set a parole eligibility date.
Nope.
You know, when picking a parole eligibility date, how do you do that? Sometimes they courts look at the age of the victim and then what the life expectancy is, and then you take the difference of that, and then you come up with your parole eligibility date. But I think the court's analysis is you look at the bottom line. What is an appropriate sentence here?
No parole.
You know, there's an old adage The punishment must fit the crime.
Yep.
There's supposed to be mercy, but there's a saying we often use in court: mercy without justice dishonors everybody. The punishment has to fit the crime. Mr. Dietrich, you don't have to apologize for having difficulty and forgiving. We're only human. There's only one person that can grant the kind of mercy that we hear about and talk about. Obviously, that's God, and only if somebody asks for it. So don't lose your faith. Don't let anybody lose their faith over what happened here, as difficult as that might be. But the punishment must fit the crime. And so what the court had thought of since that verdict is, what if this was a death penalty state?
Get
So
the
we haven't
death
had the
penalty.
death penalty here since 1853. The maximum sentence, the
Heinous,
most
atrocious.
severe sentence is life without parole. And
Heinous and atrocious
my
acts.
conflicted feelings about the death penalty aside, what if this was such a jurisdiction? Would this kind of crime, would this case,
Mitigating
with these
factors.
facts and this impact justify
It would
death
get to the
penalty?
death penalty. Yes, it would.
Some people say, well, you use a death penalty if you have multiple victims, and others say, well, when the victim is a child.
Oh, yes.
This is
They're
a
not
crime
the only
against a
reason.
child. It's a crime against Mr. and Mrs. Vanderheiden's child. It's a crime against Nikki's children. It's severe, it's brutal, it's a crime against children. The answer is yes, Mr. Burch. This is a crime that would, I believe, merit the death penalty, and for that you have to die in prison.
Yes,
And Mr.
sir.
Burch, I don't come to that decision quickly or lightly. I come to that decision by taking a step back and looking at the facts of this case and applying them to the galleon sentencing.
Because you're a big
factors.
fat lying fuck. And you deserve to die in prison.
So
Old and alone.
you have to die in prison, Mr. Burch, and I could say 100 years or 200 years, or I could do what the family says and just order life without parole. They've suffered enough. I think that's commensurate with what this crime is all about. That will be the vehicle that the court will use to ensure that you spend the rest of your life in prison. The court does that because it's fair. That's the goal of every case that ever goes into court. You want a fair result, and that's fair here. In the confines of the system, I realize it's not really fair because you have life. And you took away Nicole's life. Your Tyler someday may want to talk to you and might have that chance. Nikki's Tyler can't. But within the confines and the parameters of the criminal justice system, it's most appropriate. Life without parole to ensure that the punishment fits the crime. So, Mr. Burch, it's the order of this court, the sentence of this court, that you, George Burch, are sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Under Chapter 973.014, the court is exercising its discretion and will not set a parole eligibility date.
Yes, sir.
Now, counsel, with that sentence of no parole eligibility date, the fact that Mr. Burch is not going to get out of prison, there's going to be no extended supervision. I think the court's not going to read the determinate sentencing rules. I think any conditions of extended supervision are ruled moot. And in terms of restitution, Attorney Saunders, what's the state's position? All right. Well, I don't know if that can be derived out of, funds that Mr. Burch may earn in prison. But I will add this as much because it was mentioned by, I think it was Mrs. Dietrich. Mr. Burch, you're not to profit at all from anything that might somehow come about because of this case. It's already gotten all kinds of national publicity. Write a book, have a movie, whatever. Any monies goes to the Dietrich and Vanderheiden families. Nobody profits because of this kind of brutality. But you have 60 days, Attorney
boo-boo.
Saunders, to provide whatever kind of restitution figure you want.
Okay. So he But there you have it. Um, oh. So he, okay. Hold on. Let me. Okay, George Burch conviction upheld. By State Supreme Court in murder of Nicole Vanderheyden. And this was from June 2021. State Supreme Court upheld George Burch's conviction Tuesday in the murder of Nicole Vanderheyden. Burch appealed his 2018 conviction on the grounds that his Fourth Amendment rights were violated when a judge allowed location data from his cell phone on the night of the murder to be used during the trial, according to court documents. Burch's appeal also argued that Brown County Circuit Court Judge John Zakowski erred in allowing data from Vanderheyden's boyfriend's Fitbit to be presented without also allowing experts to testify about the technology's reliability. Justices argued in a 4-3 decision that the circuit court correctly denied Burch's request to exclude the data. We concluded that even if some constitutional defect attended either the institutional download or the initial download or subsequent assessing of the cell phone data, there was no law enforcement or exclusion of that data. Okay. Do we have a more recent one? I thought there was a more recent one. Maybe not. Okay, well, I guess not. He tried to appeal it, I guess. First degree intentional homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison without the eligibility of parole. Nope. There shall be no more. Okay, well, that's all, folks. We are done. We did it. We did it. That is all of it. He got life without parole. And if the judge could, he would bring back the death penalty and say, you get the death penalty. That is how much he is not like him. But I don't blame you, sir. 'Cause I don't like him neither. But yeah, so that's it. That's all we got. Interesting? Not interesting? Interesting? I feel bad for the mamas, for the Dylan and the babies, and the Michaela and the Tyler and the, even Burch's kids. Like, I know what it's like to have I don't want to call him a POS dad. He is now of the deceased variety, so I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but and also he didn't kill anybody that I'm aware of. So I don't know what it's like to have a murderer as a father, but I know what it's like to have a not great father. So that sucks. That's just not nice. So that breaks my heart. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe. I'm going to end it now before it gets too much longer. But yeah, tell me what you think. Tell me if you agree. Life without parole. I really think Wisconsin should bring back the death penalty. And then they should revisit all of the cases that should qualify for the death penalty. Brooks. Chandler Holderson. George Brooks. I got you three. Got you three right there to start off with. Sure, there are plenty more. But hey, what do I know? Okay. Night. Good morning. Good afternoon. Later.